The United States has just had two horrible mass shootings that have caught the attention of the world, and the blame seems to be falling on video games. Let's talk about it. What's up, everybody? I'm Pastor Mark, and today I want to talk to you about these mass shootings that have taken place in New York and in Texas, and how we as Christians and gamers can respond to these situations. So for those that need to be brought up to speed, there were two horrific mass shootings that have taken place in the United States, in New York and in Texas, that have caught the attention of the world due to their horrific nature. One took place in a supermarket and one took place in a school. Two places where you should never have shootings and violence like that. And first, before we dive into anything, I just want to emphasize and encourage that our response as followers of Jesus should be to grieve when we hear news like this. I remember hearing the news of both of these situations and my heart just broke. These are terrible, awful, horrific situations, and as people of God, our immediate reaction, rather than defaulting to politics, should be to groan in hurt with those who are hurting and suffering. This is a tragic loss of life, and our response should be to run to God and to seek to help those who need help in times like this. And too often, our knee-jerk reaction is to immediately fall onto one side or another of some political discussion. And we begin to emotionally lash out and just spout politics and just regurgitate sound bites that are coming from the news or the media or from Twitter. And we forget that real people are hurting, and God's desire is for us to hurt with them and to suffer with them and to come alongside those who need help. And so with that being said, I want to come back to these events. If you've been following the conversation on a national level, the conversation has now shifted into the who do we blame for this? And of course, you have no shortage of people who know exactly who is to blame. You have people say that it's the gun manufacturer's fault, or it's gun rights activist people's fault, or you have people saying, no, it's just the person that pulled the trigger, or you have people saying, no, it's the lack of mental health care, or you have people saying, no, it's this, or it's that, or it's the family unit, or it's the school systems, or whatever. And then, of course, the relevant thing for us as gamers is that you have people saying, no, it's violent video games' fault. And again, our knee-jerk reaction tends to be to emotionally respond and get defensive. We are already prepared with our list of facts and studies and scientific evidence that shows that violent video games don't contribute to this, and we are just ready to dive headlong into an argument. And so I want to encourage us to walk through a few steps as we enter into these conversations, not as gamers first, but as Christians first. First, I just want to encourage all of us to take a step back in these conversations and recognize that the person you're talking with is a person. They are an image bearer of God. And because they are a person, because they are an image bearer, they are deserving of dignity and respect and value. Even if they don't show any of that to you, they are valuable because they are an image bearer of God. And so we should treat them as image bearers of God. Second, I would encourage us to listen. Again, our knee-jerk reaction is to respond, to go on the defensive. We are ready with our scroll of facts and findings and studies. And so when people say this happened because kids are playing Grand Theft Auto, we are ready in our best posture of actually to just respond and lash out at people. And that is not helpful. That's not going to help someone move closer to Jesus, and it's not going to be a helpful contribution to this conversation. Instead, we should be willing to listen, to ask questions, to begin to understand why that image bearer of God is thinking what they're thinking, how they've arrived at that conclusion, and if we have missed something. And as we have that conversation, there might be a time where it's appropriate to dive into facts and findings. But so often, all we do is assume the argument that the other person is making, and we just default to getting out whatever we think, and then the conversation ends because we're arguing and we move on to the next argument. Third, we need to be honest with ourselves and with those in our community. I'm probably going to make someone mad by saying this, but to me, this is just so obvious that our world is obsessed with violence. Violence is in video games, movies, TV shows, music, podcasts, and the list goes on. Violence drives the documentaries that are produced on Netflix. That's why there's so many murder documentaries out there. And all of this just shows us that we are a society that is very comfortable with violence. And I think that is okay to acknowledge in these conversations that, hey, we live in a world that loves violence for some reason. And while the vast, vast, vast majority of people that play Grand Theft Auto are not going to go out and murder children, perhaps the violence in our media is a symptom of a very deep and real issue that our world struggles with. Even if you still play violent video games, which, by the way, I do, it's okay to acknowledge that this is a problem. Fourth, we need to recognize that it's far more important for someone to meet Jesus than to agree with us on this issue. So much of the conversation today is just left in a standstill because both sides are entrenched in their positions, and we jump into the trenches, and rather than uniting people, we actually dive into one of the trenches with them and create a bigger divide. Instead of offering people a cure of the gospel, we just end up quoting our favorite politicians or our favorite political pundits and driving a deeper wedge between people and Jesus. And so we need to be sure that we do not fall into the trap of making an idol out of the Second Amendment or of gun control issues or of video games or of anything. Remember that our highest calling as a follower of Jesus is to be an ambassador for Jesus, not for our country. And so whenever possible, we need to ensure that we are letting the light and love of Jesus shine through our conversations, not what we think is our best political solution. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have hard conversations and we shouldn't dive into the political issues and talk about law and constitutional rights and legislation and voting and all of that. But it is to say that our relationship with Jesus should trump all of those issues and should guide how we have those conversations. And finally, we need to be sure that we are praying for our country, for those that are suffering, for those that are grieving and hurting, for the violence in our world, for our school systems, for our legislators. We need to pray. Our world sees prayer as a waste of time and energy. They would rather see action on our part. Stop praying and start voting or protesting or just doing something. But what the world fails to see is that the greatest act that we can do as Christ followers is to go before God in prayer. We absolutely should still act. We are called as followers of Jesus to love in action those that are around us. And we must also recognize that one of the greatest acts of love that we can do is to pray about this situation. If we stop praying, we have lost the battle. And so you'll notice that towards the end of this video, I have not answered the question of whether or not violent video games are to blame for this situation. Because the reality is that when it comes to blame, the blame will always fall on a sinful heart. And that sinful heart needs Jesus. Violent video games can influence people to do awful things if that person doesn't know Jesus. Just like sexual movies and sexual music can influence people to do awful things if those people don't know Jesus. And so while there are so many necessary things that we as Christians should do to love others, we need to make sure that our main priority continually stays the same. We need to ask the question, do the people around me know Jesus? And if not, what can I do to share the love of Jesus with that person? And with that, I want to know, what are your thoughts on this situation? Am I oversimplifying the issue and ignoring necessary things that Christians should be doing in response to these events? Are we missing the forest for the trees when it comes to playing the blame game and just laying the blame all on one issue? Is there a better way for us to respond? I want to know your thoughts. How, as Christians, should we respond to events like this? And as always, with every video, I want you to know that I am praying for you. If you are watching this video, I have prayed for you. And if you have a specific prayer request, you can message me on Twitter. You can leave a comment on the video below, and I will pray for you specifically. So thanks for tuning into this video. Remember that God loves you. I'm praying for you, and I'll see you in the next video.